Hello everyone, my name is Atalanta and this is Solarpunking, where we discuss solarpunk ideology, things we can do in our communities to make them better, and ways to build the world that we want to live in. People get used to anything. The less you think about your oppression, the more your tolerance for it grows. After a while, people just think oppression is the normal state of things. But to become free, you have to be acutely aware of being a slave. Assata, an Autobiography by Assata Shakur. This week has been so surreal for me because I started writing this episode last week and I wanted to open it with that quote from Assata Shakur as an introduction to talking about the power of propaganda. I wanted to talk about how important it is to distinguish free speech from hate speech. But then, a few days ago, we got confirmation online that Assata Shakur, one of the most consequential Black political revolutionaries and writers of our time, had transitioned into the afterlife. I was stunned, but decided that maybe I could use her life as a revolutionary as a catalyst to talk about this. She spent her time on this earth as an advocate for a better culture, a better society, and a better future for everyone. And that made her an enemy to the United States of America. I hate to say it, but if I'm being honest, I wasn't very impressed with the movement to bring back Jimmy Kimmel's late-night TV show as some sort of fight against fascism. I actually found it kind of frustrating. I don't really watch Jimmy Kimmel or follow him online, so this is not about him or his fans. But I was bothered by how journalists like Dr. Mark Lamont Hill, Tiffany Cross, Melissa V. Harris Perry, Mehdi Hassan, Joy Reid, and multiple other journalists were fired from their positions or had their shows canceled for speaking truth to power, and specifically against Israel's occupation and genocide in Palestine. Not to mention the silencing of an entire news team from Al Jazeera, who were murdered by Israel while covering their atrocities in Palestine. We can talk about whether the government had a visible hand in forcing their dismissals or not, and the constitutional implications, but make no mistake, all of this was in service to fascism. In fact, these were the canaries in the coal mine that we have essentially ignored until this moment. Because when these folks were silenced, it seemed like it didn't make any waves except for on an extremely isolated corner of the internet. But there were no protests, no cancellations, no movements for them, and even less attention is given to conflicts in Congo and Sudan. So trying to be an advocate with such a tiny platform can be exhausting when it feels like screaming into a void. So to see all the attention a late-night TV host received kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And I know lots of people will disagree with that sentiment, but that's how I felt and honestly how I still feel about it. And I think Assata Shakur is another person whose legacy of anti-fascist activism has also largely been ignored by the mainstream. So I'd like to talk about it.
I think I come from a very strong history, and I simply wanted to live on this planet and to continue that tradition and to try in my little way to make my ancestors proud.
I read Assata, an Autobiography, when I was in high school, and it's probably the book that challenged my perspective of justice in this country. For those who don't know, Assata Shakur was a revolutionary Black activist in the U.S., a member of the Black Liberation Army after her work with the Black Panther Party put her on the FBI's radar. The government labeled her a threat because she spoke out against racism and state violence, and she was constantly harassed and surveilled by the state. The incident that made her a permanent target was a 1973 New Jersey Turnpike stop where the police opened fire on a car that she was riding in. A state trooper was killed, and despite the fact that Assata had been shot and was unarmed, and medical evidence showed she couldn't have fired the weapon, the state pinned the murder on her. Her trial and conviction showed how determined the U.S. was to crush Black liberation movements, and they used her as a political symbol and scapegoat, even though the evidence was not on their side. I'd like to share this clip of Assata speaking about socialism that made her so scary in the United States.
The whole liberation of oppressed people in the United States had to do not with climbing up some ladder to success, not for asking to be just like Rockefeller or just like DuPont or just like Ford, because that would only continue the oppression and exploitation of oppressed people in the United States, and specifically African people born and raised in the United States. Socialism is an integral part of building social justice on this planet. The condition of my people, my history, was very much connected with other oppressed people, and I began to see that the same foot that was on the necks of the Vietnamese people, that was on the necks of all oppressed people on the planet, was the same foot that was on my neck. And so I began to understand that imperialism has to go. It is a poison that is killing people all over this world. The priorities of this planet have to be completely changed. And instead of profits, instead of policies that destroy the earth, that destroy the water, that destroy human beings, I believe a policy that protects people, that makes people live in a community, a world community. That's what I believe. That's my basic political commitment at this moment.
After the shootout on the New Jersey Turnpike, Assata was badly wounded and paralyzed in her right arm. That didn't stop police from arresting her on May 2nd, 1973, and throwing her into a maximum security unit of a men's prison in an attempt to break her. She spent nearly 2 years in solitary confinement, kept under 24-hour surveillance with 2 police officers standing outside her cell at all times, with lights that never shut off, and was repeatedly strip-searched, harassed, and denied proper medical care for her gunshot wounds. Amnesty International condemned her treatment and the conditions she was held in as cruel, inhuman, and degrading. But that didn't stop the state from parading her through trial after trial in its attempt to make an example of her as a threat to other liberation activists. But against all odds, she survived their assaults by refusing to let the system crush her spirit, and in 1979, a group of activists helped her escape the prison and find refuge in Cuba. By 1984, she had secured asylum in Cuba, where she lived as a free woman and outspoken activist until last Thursday, September 25th, 2025. Here's a clip of her speaking about how her life in Cuba changed her perspective.
Well, when I came to Cuba, I really didn't know what to expect. I had these crazy images, because even though I considered myself a socialist, I considered myself someone who really identified with the Cuban Revolution, I had been raised on a diet of anti-communism. So I came here and I was expecting, first of all, everybody to look like Fidel. I thought everybody was going to wear green fatigues and stuff. It was just like a crazy thing, and I thought people would be talking like the revolution. I just had these crazy stereotypes, and then when I came, it was like, wow, a whole new world. The first thing that hit me was, just how beautiful the nature is here. Whether it's the sea, whether it's the plants. This is one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen in my life. Everything is so lush, so green, so ripe. And, just the climate made me immediately feel at home. I was very much impressed by the healthcare system, by the education system, by the sports teams, by all of the many things that the revolution has been able to accomplish. What has impressed me most has been how people live.
Even after Assata secured asylum in Cuba, the United States continued to try and paint her as a dangerous terrorist and refused to let it go. From the moment she escaped, every single administration, both Democrat and Republican, kept her on the radar as a threat. She was branded one of the FBI's most wanted terrorists, an extraordinary designation for someone whose case was already riddled with contradictions and injustices. They continuously increased the bounty on her head over the years, and even Barack Obama's administration raised the reward for her capture to $2 million, signaling to the fascist establishment that he was committed to her return. Washington kept pushing Havana to extradite her and tried to use her as a bargaining chip when tensions between U.S.-Cuba relations thawed. But fortunately, Cuba refused every time, standing by its 1984 decision to grant her asylum after they concluded that she was a political prisoner after reviewing her case and treatment. Cuban officials pointed to the torture, solitary confinement, and degrading prison conditions she endured, and made clear that sending her back to the U.S. would mean certain persecution, if not death. Through decades of shifting U.S. politics, Assata remained in exile, a symbol of both the lengths the state will go to silence black revolutionaries and of her own resilience and refusal to bow to fascism and white supremacy. I wish we would rally in large numbers around people like Assata. While I am joyful in the knowledge that the United States never recaptured her, it makes me sad that this country is still one she would have never been able to return to had she wanted to. True resistance to oppressive governments is risky and can put you in the crosshairs of authoritarians who would like nothing more than to silence those who disrupt the status quo that keeps them wealthy and in power. If things keep going the way they are now, we are going to witness the silencing and removal of our strongest voices while we are distracted by entertainers. For example, did you know that while everyone was celebrating canceling their Disney Plus subscriptions, that an immigration judge ordered the deportation of Palestinian activist Mahmoud Khalil?
Mahmoud Khalil chose to go out there and protest for Palestine, recognizing his own vulnerability in the situation, that he is not an American citizen, and that by doing so he's exposing himself to a certain type of harm. But I can guarantee you that he was preparing himself for even far worse outcomes in the process. When most people are confronted with Gaza right now, as far as the American public is concerned, they actually don't care that much. I hate seeing children die, but at the end of the day, that's not enough to activate meaningful sacrifice in my life. I can share a few things online. I can say a few things here and there. But overall, I can proceed with a level of indifference because it's not immediately consequential to my life. That actually indicates a broader attitude.
Here's the thing. We have to support the activists. I get that everyone will respond to injustice in their own way, and that's fine. But at the very least, we have to stand behind the people who are being targeted and still choose to put themselves on the line to do what must be done. We have to back the journalists, the academics, the professors, the organizers, and the revolutionaries who are on the front lines resisting propaganda, lies, and the violent assault on history and science. Supporting them means more than retweeting or showing up when something hits the mainstream. It means caring enough to pay attention to what's really going on, staying aware even when it's not trending, and refusing to let the system isolate or silence them. It requires us to be consistent, to show up in the small ways as well as the big ones, and to recognize that people on the front lines are fighting battles that protect all of us. Because if we aren't even willing to do that, then Solarpunk will just be an idealized aesthetic, and we will watch that better future die right in front of us. Thanks for listening to the 16th episode of Solarpunking. If you've enjoyed listening in so far, consider sharing this podcast with your friends and family members that you think would also like to join the movement. Also, consider leaving me a comment to let me know what you liked and didn't like. Oh, and if you haven't already, check out the new website at www.solarpunking.com. It's live. If you have excess funds, consider donating to the National Immigration Project. The National Immigration Project fights for and with those most impacted by the immigration and criminal systems. They work with attorneys and advocates nationwide to defend the rights of all immigrants, especially those facing the greatest challenges with the fewest resources. Until next week, stay hydrated and motivated. Peace.